Stories from Real Life is a production of Media Well Done, LLC.
Welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards. We often hear that life doesn't come with a manual, but what if it comes with a soundtrack? Today's guest argues that our memories don't move in straight lines, they hit in waves, much like the tracks on a mixtape. Johnzelle Anderson is a therapist, storyteller, and now the author of the powerful new memoir, Mixtape. From navigating a childhood shaped by the in-between of identity to helping others unearth their own resilience through EMDR and narrative therapy, Johnzelle is here to help us understand how to retrieve what was lost and rewrite the rhythms of our own lives. This is Stories from Real Life, and today's story is Johnzelle Anderson's Rewriting Your Life's Mixtape.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to episode 203 of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thank you for joining us for the podcast where our real stories are so much more interesting than fiction, like today's story. Our guest today was born into a family with a disengaged West African father and a volatile white mother. Therapist and storyteller Johnzelle Anderson grew up mixed race in 1990s Roanoke, Virginia, feeling like an outsider in every room. He's here today to share his story with us today. So Johnzelle, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So you're a therapist, as I mentioned, and a storyteller. So every therapist has that therapist voice. So yes. Are you planning to use that voice during this interview, or are you going to use your storyteller's voice?
Me as a therapist and a storyteller are the same person.
Okay.
Which is it's interesting because you get the same Johnzelle no matter whether you're my client, you're my friend, you're a person I'm telling a story to. So it's just me. Especially as Black people, we know code switching, right? I'm at a place in my life where I've had to do it so much, like you said, growing up mixed race and things like that. I don't do that no more. So I am me.
Okay.
So you'll get the therapist voice as well as the storyteller voice. It's just Johnzelle.
Okay. I appreciate that. And we're going to be digging into your background quite a bit, in addition to talking about your book, your Mixtape, a memoir book.
Yep.
So
right
if your life story were a movie and you couldn't play yourself, which actor do you think would be playing Johnzelle Anderson?
Ooh, if it were playing me now?
Yes.
As in at the age I am now, J. Cole.
Okay.
I get that comparison a lot.
Okay.
So.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll go with J. Cole. All right. So let's make this personal here. My own children are also biracial, mixed race. And I've written about their uniqueness of being Black and white, yet not Black or white. So you've spoken about being raised in the in-between of identity. When was the first time you first felt like you truly belonged to yourself rather than some category?
Wow. The first time I felt like I truly belonged to myself rather than a category, probably when I went to West Africa for the first time in 2023. And I was welcomed in a holistic way that made me feel like I was home. And it was the first time being away from the United States to where, I had been out of the country before, but I really felt a sense of belonging, and it really shifted and made sense of a lot of things about identity for me. So, and then I think that was a catalyst to this era in life that I'm in now, for sure.
Okay. I was going to ask you about if you had ever met any of your West African ancestors. So how well did you get to know them? And was that the first time you ever met them, or had you been corresponding with them before you went on the trip?
Yeah. So my father is from Sierra Leone, West Africa. So when I went to Ghana, I've been to Ghana 3 times now, and I've been to Sierra Leone once. So all that I knew, because my father wasn't really that involved in my upbringing, the last time I saw him, I did ask him where in West Africa he was from, and he said Freetown, Sierra Leone. So when I decided to go to West Africa, I intentionally chose a country that wasn't Sierra Leone, because since I don't have a connection with my father, I wanted to connect with the continent on my own terms. So I went to Ghana and explored that country and felt a connection there. They're very also welcoming to African Americans and stuff like that. But when I went to Sierra Leone, I actually took my daughter with me in December. We went to Sierra Leone, and it was my daughter's 6th birthday while we were there, so it was special, and it was her first time coming to Africa. So even though my own father didn't give me much to connect with where he emigrated from, I knew the place, so I took my daughter to the place, whereas he didn't take his son there. So I was able to do for my daughter what he didn't do for me, but I didn't know anybody there, and I was okay with that. But the funny thing is, the resemblance between, like, say, me, my daughter, and the people in Sierra Leone, very strong genetics. We all look the same, which is kind of cool. Yeah. Yeah, that's a nuanced answer to your question there.
Okay, yeah, that's a great answer. So your last name is Anderson. I'm wondering, I'm guessing that's your mother's name. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. All right. Mm-hmm. Since making a connection with your West African roots, have you thought about changing your last name or using that name as part of your own name?
That's a good question. I have not. I know Anderson is, I guess the name doesn't, I love my first name. Last name doesn't matter so much to me to where I would want to change it. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I've never thought about changing it for real.
All right. So what about your first name, Johnzelle? That's an unusual name. Where does that come from?
Yeah, so I explained that in the book. Basically, it's a funny, I'll give you the drama of it, okay? So okay. My grandma has been married a few times, and she was married to this guy, and he had worked with somebody in New York at some point, and the name was Johnzelle, right? So I guess he had mentioned the name around the time that my mother was pregnant with me, and my grandma mentioned it to my mother, and it was like, oh, okay. And that's where it came from, was, somebody heard about it, it appealed, and I got the name. Now, the drama is that very husband of my grandmother, who came up with the name, ended up cheating on my grandmother while they were married, and he had 2 mixed-race children with the mistress, and he named the first one Johnzelle. So here I was already here, and then he named his child Johnzelle, so it was weird. But that's where it gets dramatic. But yeah, it was a random name, but yeah. But I like my name a lot.
Okay, cool. So as I mentioned, your book is called Mixtape, and you revisit some incredibly vulnerable moments in your life, and you have tracks rather than calling them chapters in the book. So what was the hardest track for you to write while still living through the healing part of it? Yeah.
I very vividly remember, I want to say it's track 34. Let me find it here. Yes, track 34, which is Rest in Peace, Captain Savaho, which is the song by Mayada. And that track is a beginning to end story about how it was about a story about how I had mentored this mixed race guy that, kind of like a little brother figure. and how it went terribly wrong, but how it kind of triggered some of my own experiences growing up mixed race and wanting to give back and help somebody. But what happens when you try to help somebody that don't want to be helped, kind of thing. And the reason it was so difficult to write is because I was in the process of writing this book when the situation kind of blew up. So it was happening in real time as I was writing the book. So it was a very difficult thing. And the chapter begins with the line, "This is the story of how I made it to 31 years old before I got my heart broken for the first time." So imagine I've been through all the things I've been through in my life, but this is what really broke me. And it was a culmination of everything that had happened before that. That one was really difficult to write, but it was also very healing to include that in the book because it's part of the tapestry of my story that kind of continues on. So,
okay. So in your book, you mentioned the concept of reaching back to fetch what was lost. So what is one specific...
Sankofa.
Yeah, Sankofa. So what is one specific piece of your younger self that you're glad you went back and worked your way through that situation in your mind?
Yeah. So I'm going to say trigger warning to those who are listening, molestation, just in case someone's listening and they are, yeah. Okay. So while I was writing this book, I had like an outline and different things, and I used the music to kind of evoke memories. And I remember I was actually in DC going to see Miss Lauryn Hill in the Fugees in concert, and I had stopped to, get some coffee, and it was a little bit early to check into the hotel. So I got my laptop out. I started, looking at my outline and things. I was like, there's not really much going on between this year and this year. I don't have any like stories or anecdotes or anything. Though I had experienced what I went through, it wasn't until that moment that it dawned on me. Like, it didn't dawn on me as if I didn't know, but it had been under the surface of what had happened to me. And it was only when I was writing the book that I had to accept and acknowledge and bring full awareness for the first time of what did happen. And by writing that, which is track 8, the song is called Overture. It needed to happen. And I think this book gave me the space for that to happen, because the way I see it is our brains can turn things off as a safety measure. It's called dissociation. And mind you, I had been a therapist for years, right? And I've worked with people who have been through that and stuff. But it never activated fully, like, hey, you went through that and this is your time. But I also believe that our brains are high tech, and I needed to be in a place of safety and stability before I was able to go back and get that. And I did that, and I wrote about it, and I'm glad I did, because people who have read the book and who have read that, they have, shared their stories and let me know, like, for a man to talk about that happening, and furthermore, a Black man to talk about that happening to them, is not so common. And to go back and get it, and for it to, the whole point of my storytelling and being a therapist is this somehow ability to take what didn't go right, not to revise history, because we don't like revisionist history, but to take what happened and what is left and use some of it as a tool to learn something, to grow, to inspire, to entertain, to make something of what was left, even though we would have rather the bad thing not happen in the first place. And that's what I hope can be done by using Sankofa to go back and get that. That was probably the second hardest thing to talk about in the book.
Okay. So just a memoir, and just in general, is a sort of a form of exposure.
Mm-hmm.
What was the most terrifyingly honest part that you left in the book that you struggled with wanting to take out, but ultimately chose just to leave it there?
There's two moments that come to mind. So the fourth grade talent show, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
You'll have to read the book to know why that's so cringy. I wrote about it, though, because it was my cringiest moment ever. But also, if it exists in a book, that means I've overcome it. Because I literally put it out for the world to see, right? The second one was, or I would say an amalgamation would be, there are some moments, because no one likes a memoirist who makes themselves the victim the whole time and they're perfect and everyone else is the problem. I talk about how I messed up in times. Like I talk about, stealing money, one time. I talk about saying something, ignorant to somebody and how, you put your foot in your mouth kind of thing. Like, you're gonna see some scenes where people messed around and they found out, right? I cuss some people out, and I tell those stories too, because I want to show myself as a whole human being. I'm not worried. I'm not embarrassed of the cuss outs. When I said it, I meant it. Yeah. But when I put my foot in my mouth in some cases, or when I was less than perfect, right? I think there's a responsibility and a humanity to being imperfect that makes a memoir better, because I personally don't want to read about somebody who was the victim the whole time and they never did nothing wrong and they were perfect. That's not real. So I gave my whole self here. So
okay.
The cringy was probably the hardest to keep in there. The
cringy, the angry, the good parts, the lessons, all of it.
Yeah.
All right. So you dealt with the realization that racism can start within your own family. So how do you help client navigate, quote, loving the person but healing from the wound they gave you?
Ooh, that is a great question. Sometimes you can't heal in the place that wounded you. That's the ultimate, if it has to come to that. Sometimes you can, with expectations and boundaries and accountability. I do a lot of teaching my clients the difference between an expectation, a boundary, and an ultimatum. An ultimatum is not really that beneficial because it's a blending of an expectation and a boundary. Expectation is what I want you to do. Boundary is what I don't want you to do. Accountability is, hey, you've done this before and that hurt me, right? In my own, let's say because I talk about how basically my first racists were my white caregivers. I had to cut some people off after trying and trying and trying, right? If we do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, you know what they call that. And I think in this stage of life I'm in, I don't have a ton of energy to go back and forth with someone who is insisting on not taking accountability. So I teach and model that for clients and meet them where they're at, because not everybody needs to cut everybody off. Sometimes they do, but they don't want to. But yeah, healing can take different paths depending on what the people who do the wounding do. So there's a variety of factors that could play into that. But I do believe that I'm well equipped to do that, given what I've been through and my decade of working with other people, and obviously also being an empathetic person who's always immersed in storytelling. So, yeah, it's a journey for sure.
Okay, that's interesting. So I've had multiple people on this podcast reference the book "The Body Keeps the Score," and I have it on my list to read at some point. I've been really, really busy writing my own book and getting ready to release that.
Yeah,
but how does it manifest in the body? How does trauma manifest in the body before it ever reaches the mind?
If I'm going back in my own story, my I can think of different ways that it has manifested in my body, and I want to tell you that I think this might be the first time I'm thinking of it in this way as you ask this, because I've read The Body Keeps the Score. It is kind of clinical, so take your time with it because it's very kind of dense. My body keeps the score in my jaw, and the tension in my neck, in my stomach, tightening, and various sensations. And I was having panic attacks before I ever knew what a panic attack was, And what was the second part of your question?
Oh, how does it manifest in your body before it reaches your mind?
Correct. So I was having panic attacks and these like tight jaw, teeth grinding, like headaches, panic attacks, all of these sorts of things before I ever even had awareness of the fact that I had an anxiety disorder. If I ever had awareness, even before, realizing the extent of the trauma that I lived through, these things are imprinted from an early age. So, and then part of healing too is recognizing, okay, I am where I am. I feel what I feel. What is left, and where is my path to this? The path to healing isn't always through going back to the person who did the harm and getting reparation. But yeah, it could definitely take a toll on you before it ever gets to your mind. I mean, I made it to, I was like 31 or so when I fully was able to confront the toll that what happened to me at like 5 and 6 had on me, It was a long time afterwards. So, wow. But my body had stored the memories and the sensations and all of that. It just, I was carrying that.
Wow. That's a heavy burden.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what's the biggest myth about resilience that you want to debunk for the readers and for the listeners today?
The biggest myth I would debunk is that BS that everything happens for a reason. People always say that, like, oh, everything happens for a reason, or it's never beneficial. And I disagree because, yeah, I'm over here talking about how we can take bad things that happen and find something useful from it. But no one would make the argument that, oh, it's great that you were abused because you had a book to write. Like, it doesn't make sense. So everything happens for a reason. I have a whole book worth of things that happen, not for the reason when they were happening. It wasn't for my good. It wasn't to build character. It's what I did with it that was its own thing. But yeah, the biggest myth to debunk is that everything happens for a reason. People say it all the time, and I hate that.
Yes, I agree. On both counts. People say it all the time, and it grates on my nerves every time they say it. So, as we talked about at the top of the show, you're a healer and a storyteller. Are those ever two different jobs? Are they for you? Or are they always intersecting? Are they always part of the same narrative?
The great thing about being a therapist is that every hour I get something different. So sometimes it's story heavy in that someone's telling me a story. Sometimes in my work, I'm exchanging a story where I give an example of something maybe from my life, or of course, if I give an example from maybe another client's life, I'm censoring information to, keep it confidential and stuff. But whatever I've learned over the time, I'm full of stories, as is my client, right? And then sometimes the healing is just holding space. Sometimes it's no, let's get in here and do some work. Here's what you got to do. So it really depends on who shows up and what they bring. But I exist in the blending of those two because, like I said, the same person that shows up as a storyteller is the same one that shows up as a therapist. And the therapist is a storyteller. The storyteller is a therapist. But I don't write like a therapist, if that makes sense. My book doesn't read like The Body Keeps the Score. No shade to that book, but I'm showing up as a human, and I'm having a conversation with my reader similar to what we're doing here. So,
all right, let's talk about the title of the story behind the title of your book, Mixtape. Is that sort of play on your racial mixture, or are you just a big music fan and you wanted to use that?
It's both. Okay. So most people ask me the other part, the second part of the question first. They'll be like, well, mixtape, of course it means, a mixtape, right? Like a playlist that you curate, which in the front of my book, I have the QR codes to the actual mixtape that goes with this. So the title is self-explanatory, but if you look at the first 4 letters, mixed. So the word mix is in my identity of what they called me growing up in the 90s. Oh, you're mixed, or you're mixed race, or you're mixed race black. It's in that word mixtape. So I knew the title and the concept of this book before I ever wrote a word. And so you're correct. It's both.
Okay. So if your 10-year-old self got a copy of Mixtape, what would that child learn? How would that child respond to it, do you think?
I think that 10-year-old me would be very astounded and would be skeptical of who he will become. Because 10-year-old me did not have the hope that I could be who I am. Because I didn't know I was going to be who I am 3 years ago.
Wow.
So the me I imagined at 10 years old is a very different me than is here now. And he's even better. And that's not to toot my own horn. It is, there was a point where I would say around that same time I went to Ghana where I really tapped into the importance of love, liking, and understanding myself fully, unapologetically. And now that I've been living in that for a few years, it's just the beginning. So 10-year-old me would be very inspired and would be skeptical because 10-year-old me had to be skeptical because there's always strings attached to something.
Wow.
So I would have to honor that he's not ready to understand how he will be okay.
Okay. Wow. So you're now becoming a public figure, and as you become an author and all the other tentacles of your journey. So what has that changed the way you show up for your clients in the therapy room?
I think it just continues to, every session I do, everything I do, every day I live is making me better for the next session, for the next story, for the next interaction with my daughter. So I would say that continuing to evolve is making me a better therapist. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. I just have a couple questions left as we start to wind down the conversation. So we talk a lot about healing, but does healing ever fully arrive, or is it a journey that you'll be traveling your whole life for most people?
I think evolution is essential while we're living. I think healing in some regards can be complete. But kind of like you said, that book, the body keeps the score. Even when we've made sense of something, processed something, learned from something, grown for something, it still happened. The idea of healing would be that you're somehow restored to what was before harm was done. And we don't have that. We can't, live as if it didn't happen. Like this car I'm sitting in right now, I got rear-ended in the fall last year. The airbags came out and everything. It was, they were able to fix it, right? But the car was still in an accident. Like it happened, right?
Right.
Even though they put new parts on it, it will not be what it was originally, right?
It'll show up in the Carfax report.
Yeah. So kind of, it's kind of like, okay, the body keeps the score, right? So there's a metaphor for you.
Yep. Never thought we'd talk about Carfax and bodies keeping score.
Yeah. Why not?
But here we are. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So, final question for you today. If people only remember one thing about your life's work so far, what do you want that one thing to be?
Okay. If they remember one thing about my life's work, I would want them, I guess if they've interacted with me, I want them to know that they deserve reciprocity. And I want them to know that reciprocity means that they are, they deserve to be loved, liked, and understood internally, as in to themselves, externally, as in giving love, like, and understanding, and receiving love, like, and understanding. You don't have to earn that. Not everybody is, it's not wise to try to get that from everybody, but you're worthy of connection and reciprocity because we're social beings. Okay. That's what I would want people to know from either interacting with me or having read my book.
Okay, that's a good way to wind down the episode today. So, Johnzelle, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, I enjoyed talking with you. Thank you for having me.
So my guest today has been Johnzelle Anderson, and his book is called Mixtape, a Memoir. So check out the show notes to this episode, and there'll be a link so that you can get a copy of his book. That's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Until next time, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.